The second one deals with the question of political structures. What we have achieved is a military defeat of what is essentially a political problem. And as the government and the president do remind us, there is a need for a political settlement of this issue as well. And that might well require constitutional reform. We've been at this for some time. In fact, over the last 3 decades, there have been endless rounds of talks, negotiations in parliamentary committees set up to deal with this. But there's never been sufficient common ground amongst the main protagonists for these deliberations to lead to a satisfactory conclusion. The third area is probably the most controversial and indeed the most sensitive. Most controversial and sensitive because of international reports, and here I'm referring to, in particular, the advisory panel of experts reporting to Secretary General of the United Nations on the last days of the war, where the panel found that allegations of war crimes and violations of international humanitarian law by both the agency and the government of Sri Lanka were credible. And they called for both national as well as international mechanisms to investigate this. This was reinforced by the controversial British Channel 4 television documentary called Killing Fields in Sri Lanka. Both of these documents have been rejected out of hand by the Sri Lankan government as being false, manufactured, fabricated, etc. But nevertheless, there is this issue here of as to whether in Sri Lanka, or indeed a general question, can you achieve unity without reconciliation? And can you achieve reconciliation without accountability? That is a key conundrum, if you like, that a lot of societies coming out of vicious internal conflicts have to face. And this is indeed one that we face in Sri Lanka at the present moment. Allied to it is a culture of impunity that obtains in respect of human rights violations that have been committed over decades, but also in particular with regard to egregious human rights violations committed over the last decade, for which we did set up a commission of inquiry to which was attached an independent international group of eminent persons. Unfortunately, that group threw up its hands in despair and left, saying that there wasn't a political commitment to search for the truth, and that commission of inquiry report submitted to the President has not been made public. And the cases that they looked at are effectively stored. There has been no particular response. Also, it's, I think, only fair to say that there is a certain climate of fear and restraint in terms of public debate and deliberation because of the way in which there was a certain amount of repression at the time of the war that continues insofar as public discourse has been very much dichotomized into discourse between traitors and patriots. And there is, as a consequence, considerable self-censorship by media that saw itself targeted to the extent that something like 12 journalists were killed and over 20 have fled the country and live in exile. So that whole question of reversing the culture of impunity, trying to found a unity upon reconciliation, which in turn is founded upon accountability. The issue of the political settlement, to be able to have a unity in which every citizen, irrespective of ethnicity or any other difference, feels part of the entire establishment. And also, the much more practical and mundane, but tremendously important issue of people being able to go home and being able to regain livelihoods. Now, let me say at the outset that I feel very strongly that our government at the present moment does not see these things in these terms. The perspective that the government has is one in which it projects economic development as an overarching priority. From my perspective, I think it over-prioritizes economic development, and the argument is somewhat along these lines. But we will pursue economic development with the same single-handedness, single-mindedness of purpose and determination as we did the defeat of terrorism. In doing that, therefore, questions of rights, in particular civil and political rights, are irrelevant at best or subversive at worst. Economic development is therefore being projected as some kind of panacea to move from past into future without having to go through that tortuous process of reckoning, of accountability, of responsibility, indeed, of establishing the truth. Now, this is not the first time that in Sri Lanka we've had a regime that has projected economic development as being the overarching priority of the day. In 1970,